Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. So much reaction to a very hectic Spanish Grand Prix indeed. Ferrari trying to figure out what went wrong with Charles Leclerc's power unit and whether it can possibly be saved for the rest of the season. Hamilton and Mercedes believing they will challenge in a few races time for victories this season. And also Red Bull trying to figure out what went wrong with the DRS of Verstappen, explaining why it happened and how they exactly plan to fix it going forwards. Very much enjoy your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it on the verge of 2K. So much to dive into today. Firstly, if you guys missed the race, just wanted to look at the quick overview of the positions. Of course, the keynote really was Charles Leclerc retiring on lap 30 or so. I think he pitted for mediums. He then went about 4 laps or so before being forced to retire from the race, because effectively it sounded like his turbo gave up the ghost and the engine wasn't particularly happy about it. He had to eventually grind to a halt and retired in the garage. That is obviously not a good sign, right? It was only a few races ago where Verstappen said it was going to take him 45 races to catch up to Leclerc at the top of the championship. Within just a few races, it seems like Ferrari have bottled it to a degree. Of course, there's a long season to go, but right now, well, Red Bull in control of both championships. Bit of drama really at the front of the grid between Verstappen and Perez, whether, Perez should have allowed Verstappen to go past. We'll discuss that here in a couple of seconds. But also the keynote outside of that really was the Mercedes, right? The fact that Hamilton was down to down to 19th after just the first lap. And he had a monster stint on the mediums in the middle of the race, kind of followed that up with the softs towards the ends, charged his way through the field, and at times was doing the fastest laps of anyone on the track. Of course, who knows how hard Verstappen was pushing towards the end of the race. Eventually overtook Bottas, overtook Sainz, was up to 4th place before, some overheating issues for both Mercedes right on the very final laps, and apparently some coolant leak and stuff like this forced him to slow down a bit, ease off, and let Sainz back through the 4th place. But yeah, incredible turnaround for the Mercedes. The Red Bulls extending their advantage. Very difficult time, of course, for the Ferraris. Bottas with a great race. Both Alpines also finishing in the points was very respectable. Norris as well up here in P8 despite being diagnosed with tonsillitis after the fact. That was a remarkable drive from him. And of course, Monaco's just around the corner. Wanted to touch on Ferrari first though, because as Charles Leclerc says, everything was perfect until the loss of power. He looked like he was on for the victory, especially after Verstappen's spin early on. But yeah, the pace was really good before, of course, that type of stuff happens. And luck in Monaco isn't generally rather good. Now, of course, Ferrari are trying to figure out what went exactly wrong with this and whether it's possible that they can actually use this engine going forwards. As of course, Ferrari's hoping that it's not suffered any damage outside of just the turbo, which seemed to give up the ghost. So we'll see how that one goes, of course. And as Bonotto said, honestly, no idea whether this power unit, I believe the second one from Charles Leclerc, could re-enter the engine pool. Very difficult to judge, but I would say it's very difficult if you stop like that. Maybe it's only a couple of components that can't be used, but we need to analyze it first, right? So it's very possible, the rumor had it that already Ferrari were planning to use 4 engines this season and take a penalty. Now they might have to use 5, and of course that's going to be far from ideal. Now, as Giuliano does say right here, though, in Monaco, probably a lot of the teams will put their first power unit back in because it's not such a power-dependent circuit, right? So they can probably get away with that. So probably it's not going to be an issue there, so they've got a bit of time to figure things out. But yeah, far from ideal, of course, from their perspective. Now, I wanted to look at the Mercedes here because, of course, I didn't even mention George Russell, the phenomenal defense he put up and was leading for a few laps before he eventually got done by Perez right here. The battle he had with Verstappen, the fact that Russell was in the lead for so long, he probably wouldn't have been in the lead for so long if Verstappen's DRS was working properly. We'll discuss that here in a second. But some of the battles that he had with the Red Bulls were absolutely fantastic, and Hamilton would have been right there with him, if not even faster, if he hadn't have had that issue on the first lap. Colliding with Magnussen, getting new tyres and having to force his way through the pack as he did from lap 25, effectively to 35. He was pretty much the fastest guy on the track at this point, just absolutely tearing up the field. And towards the end, of course, without that issue, would have had a very solid P4. He would have probably only been about 12 seconds behind George Russell at the end of the race, despite being almost 40 seconds behind him, or 40 seconds behind the leader, 30 seconds behind Russell, most certainly, when things were all kicking off at the start here. Now, Hamilton says, race pace much, much better. The car is much nicer in the race. Even Toto Wolff reckon, right, of course, he's going to be biased to a degree, but I'm sure he was looking at the data and the fact that if he didn't have that early issue, he would have been right up there racing for the victory, right? And we'll look at the kind of times here in a second. The fact that Mercedes last time out in Miami, even at Hamilton's race pace there, was still 1.2 seconds a lap at that circuit off the leader in Verstappen. Now, on average, he was only 0.3 of a second off. And on this stint on the mediums and the final stint as well on the softs, he was pretty much on pace, if not faster at times than the leading Red Bulls, which is quite remarkable. And actually, I'm pretty sure Hamilton had the fastest first and third sector of the entire Grand Prix. Russell was only a couple of tenths behind on average as well. And I would have loved to see what would have happened towards the end of the race if Hamilton had been there from the start, because, could he have taken Perez? Because Perez is on a slightly different strategy for Verstappen. It wouldn't have made it so easy for Red Bull to decide what to do with Perez, because they just pitted him, say, okay, you're getting some softs, you can chase down Verstappen, but you're never going to catch him. And probably Verstappen would have got past Perez anyway, to be honest, given that the pace differential that they had with Verstappen on those younger tyres. But Perez kind of wanted to fight with him. Red Bull didn't want that to happen, which you can understand, but, Perez's frustrations were being made loud and clear as well. But definitely interesting to see these numbers compared to where Leclerc and Sainz are, of course, right here behind, and Sainz may have picked up some damage on the underside of his car, and kind of the Venturi tunnels that caused the ground effect weren't so ideal, maybe getting thrown around by when he went off onto the gravel, so maybe he would have been quicker, but at the end it's Russell that gets the P3, Hamilton that gets the P5. Now Mercedes seemingly aren't slowing down after their kind of obviously great results, probably better than they expected, right? They're probably looking at this pace in the race and thinking, wow, like we have a very competitive car here, because Red Bull these last few weeks have certainly been, concerning themselves very much so with, reducing weight of the car. They know aerodynamically Red Bull have a good car, so they've been focusing massively on weight reduction, and really Mercedes haven't got around to that yet, right? Rumour has it that Red Bull and Ferrari are both kind of down very near the 798 kilogram weight limit, whereas Mercedes probably have another 10-15 kilo to lose. There's at least a good few tenths in that, which might honestly be the difference between the cars right now. So they're going to have to keep developing. Whether it's going to be so easy to do so, though, is another question we'll see here in a second. But they believe there are further upgrades to come, as Andrew Chauvelin kind of describes here. The most encouraging thing is the improvement in pace we have seen this weekend. A lot of hard work's gone into it. We now see a route to develop our way out of this and back into a position where we can fight for pole and wins. We've got some unusual tracks coming up, starting with Monaco, where we need to focus on low speed performance. We've got some parts in the pipeline that can hopefully help in that regard. So apparently they've got more kind of upgrades to come here, or at least more parts to come for lower speed corners like Monaco that will probably be coming up here over the coming days as well. And Hamilton says the following, right? He's confident now after, he could have even retired the car. He kind of thought maybe we'll just save this power unit after the first lap, and Bono was like, look, we can get at least P8 here. Turns out he probably should have got P4 at the end of the day, ends up with P5, but as he describes, so I'm confident, it gives me great hope that at some stage we will be fighting for the victory. And he also mentions, I thought was rather interesting, that Mercedes kind of experimented something on Russell's car in qualifying that seemed to end up being the way to go. So I believe he was a 10th off George Russell in qualifying, but in the race he was a couple of tenths faster, right? So I do wonder if they kind of do that for Hamilton's car in future, whether he feels like, okay, he can finally take control of this teammate battle once again, because of course Russell's been getting pretty much all the luck this season, but obviously has also been driving phenomenally. I think to me, like a number one, number two driver of the day were Hamilton, Russell, probably in that order. And still, the only driver to have completed every lap of this season so far, the only driver to have finished top 5 in every single race so far, he's had a phenomenal season, no doubt about it. Yesterday was probably his best race in Formula 1, to be honest. Now let's talk about Red Bull, of course, the frustrations that Perez had not being able to fight with Verstappen, even though, as I said, probably Verstappen was going to get him regardless with the quicker tyres he had, and there was slightly different strategies going on there, but I can understand Checo being frustrated with the situation. But of course, the big talking point of the Red Bull's race really was Verstappen's DRS not working early on. Had he have had it working, it was pretty much working on some of the shorter DRS back straights, and then on the main pit straight, it was working rather intermittently. He'd try and open it, it would close again immediately, and he wasn't really liking it all that much. And it was confused as well, the graphics. There's a graphic when someone's chasing another car and it says DRS kind of at the bottom side of the screen, and it sometimes goes green, sometimes goes grey if they've got it active or not, and it was really confused what was going on with Verstappen's car, right? And sometimes it would work and he'd have a good go at Russell, sometimes it wouldn't, and Russell would be able to stay ahead without getting attacked at all. Now, we said earlier that pretty much what Red Bull have been doing these last few weeks is focusing very aggressively on reducing weight as much as they possibly can. This seemingly was the cause of their issues. As Helmut Marko says, why did the DRS problem occur with Verstappen's car and not Sergio Perez? He says weight reduction. At this pace of development, we can't do everything for both cars. Basically saying that, look, we've been trying to reduce the weight more from Verstappen's car than Perez's car. Another indication for Perez that, yes, you're not the number one driver at Red Bull, but I'm basically saying that, look, we've been trying to reduce weight as much as we possibly can, and that might have affected, and seemingly has affected, the DRS issue. So there's some sort of weight they've reduced, or they've tried to swap one part out for another that, for whatever reason, is not allowing the DRS to open as it normally should do. So maybe they got a bit too aggressive on this front, right? And obviously Verstappen was rather frustrated in the race that it actually wasn't working. Eventually it worked out in his favour, of course, but as Helmut Marko says, we now know where the problem lies, I imagine, because they swapped out a part for a much lighter one that wasn't up to the task for whatever reason. Still a few days to fix it for Monaco, of course, and shouldn't be a problem. Of course, they want it to work as in qualifying. It can also be a problem if it doesn't work in qualifying, right? Because you're going to need a little bit of extra speed boost, even if you're not going to try all that much overtaking in the race. But definitely treat your perspective on this one in the comment section below. Wanted to touch on this actually, because this has been a big talking point of the last really few hours here, to be honest, around the budget cap. Now, look, Horner's going to say this from the Red Bull side, because and of course, he has a bias in favour of doing this, right? Raising the budget cap. He's basically saying that, look, 7 teams out of the 10 need it to be raised because of the huge inflationary pressures that are kind of upping the cost that a lot of the teams have to deal with. That makes sense. The problem is that when you hear this from Horner, and maybe from other teams as well, they have an incentive to want to raise the budget cap by whatever percentage they want to do that, so that they can kind of continue their aggressive development, right? So this is kind of the key grey area really here, where Horner and the like are going to say, yeah, okay, we need the budget cap up because of inflationary pressures and we don't have enough money, and we're going to have to miss 4 races of the season. We're going to have to miss the last 4 races if you guys don't raise the cap. I kind of doubt that's going to be the case, but what it would possibly mean is if they don't raise the cap at all, the teams might just have to stop developing. Rumour has it, at least according to this Amos article article we'll have a look at some details from in a second, the one expert predicts the teams will effectively have to stop developing in, well, after Canada in effectively June if this goes forward, because apparently Red Bull and Mercedes are already very close to this budget, so they obviously want it raised. That would make sense, but whether the other teams agree, that's of course another question entirely. So apparently 7 of these teams that are demanding this kind of inflation surcharge, if it doesn't happen, then apparently a lot of the development is going to grind to a halt, and that is where things could get quite messy, right? Because everyone, I mean, we saw Ferrari just the other day was submitting a dossier to the FIA to say, okay, look, we think Red Bull spent this amount, so just keep an eye on it to make sure, you know, they're not doing anything dodgy over and above the kind of the development limit that they have for budget cap spending this season. But the thing is, it's so difficult to tell really what another team is spending, and therefore things could get rather messy when, well, teams turn up to the latter half of the season, they turn up with some new parts, and all of a sudden people are thinking, okay, hang on a second, how can they afford that? We can't afford it. How are they affording it? Let's have a look at their finances. FIA's got to investigate. So it does create, if anything, more problems than it solves dealing with, you know, the budget cap's probably a good idea on paper, but actually executing it and making it work, if there's any grey areas or loopholes that some of these top teams can kind of go through, is an interesting one. But you know, it would be a crazy situation if somehow Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari, all these teams just can't run at the last few races because they've run out of money, and it's just Haas versus Aston Martin, or probably Aston Martin spent a lot as well, Haas versus Williams for the Grand Prix victory. I doubt it's going to happen. I imagine it's posturing to some degree from some of these teams, but certainly an interesting discussion point that is not going to go away. Now, well, I wanted to mention this as well, of course, big story of the day was that Verstappen taking the championship lead away from Charles Leclerc. A great start, of course, for him. After Australia, it looked like it was nailed on that, well, Ferrari were going to run away with this championship. 3 races later, very much a different story. 3 races time from now could be a very different story. Again, who knows what Mercedes are going to be doing over the coming races. But yes, Verstappen does lead the Drivers' Championship. Russell in 4th, Hamilton here in 6th, of course, with Sainz kind of splitting the middle. Norris, of course, he's been picking up points after points these last few races in a very impressive fashion. And yeah, Red Bull dominating, not necessarily dominating, but they're way ahead, honestly, in the kind of Constructors' Championships as well. So they're leading both championships. They're certainly odds-on favourites to win the entire thing right now. But yeah, the Ferrari comeback, the Mercedes comeback story, whether that's even possible, like, well, we'll have to see how these next coming races go. Beginning, of course, in Monaco this coming weekend. There has, of course, been some talk about the fact that it might be raining on Sunday. We always look at this like so many days out, and then it turns out that it's just never raining. So look, I'm holding out hope that we might get an interesting race, but more than likely there's going to be no rain, and probably this is just all red herrings from the weather forecast, but you know, we can only hope. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new as always, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.